I'm not going to have any comment on the spot.
It's a courtroom drama that has the Prime Minister's top aides contradicting each other.
Bob, I did not know that Mr. Wright was going to cut that check.
Ray Novak, the PM's chief of staff, denies he was told twice, in a meeting and in an email, about Nigel Wright's plan to personally repay Mike Duffy's expenses. But ex-PMO lawyer Benjamin Perrin told court Novak was with him in Wright's office when the $90,000 check was talked about, casting doubt on who's telling the truth. Duffy's trial is on hiatus until after the election.
Senator Wally, what's your reaction?
But RCMP investigators probing Pamela Wallen's Senate expenses have handed their file over to Crown prosecutors, meaning charges could be imminent, and that could be double trouble for Harper. With me now are Keith Beardsley, who was the Prime Minister's former Deputy Chief of Staff, criminal lawyer Solomon Friedman, and in Toronto, former RCMP investigator Garry Clement. So first question to you, Mr. Beardsley. The Duffy trial showed that we had a PMO that had no problems with ethics. They're no ethical moral compass. They seemed to think it was okay to lie to the Canadian public. We know that trial, the Tories took a big hit in public opinion. But what are Conservatives saying? Did the base feel this?
I think they have. If you talk to long-time Conservative, they're shaking their heads at what went on. They're not too sure who to believe at this point because you have contradicting stories. But there's definitely a concern out there in the field, out there with the party workers, the people who go to bats during a campaign, the ones who are out working for candidates, this type of thing. There's definitely a concern.
So Mr. Friedman, I was struck by Benjamin Perrin, who was Mr. Harper's supposedly special counsel. He was Mr. Harper's lawyer. Yet he never seemed to have a discussion with the Prime Minister. We knew that this hoax was going on the Canadian public, and that they were negotiating this $90,000 deal to pay off Duffy's expenses, yet not once did he go to the Prime Minister.
You know, two things really struck me as being incongruous about Mr. Perrin's role. The first one was when you have a solicitor-client relationship, you need to have two-way communication. You need to be directly advising your client, but you also need to be taking instruction from your client so you can act based on those instructions. That seemed to be completely absent here. But what also seemed to be absent here was any real legal work being done by Mr. Perrin. Was he providing legal advice? Was he providing legal counsel? It seems as if he was in a discussion about public relations and spin more than actual, legal work here, which is not the traditional role of the lawyer. And we have to ask ourselves, what was really happening here in terms of his role as a special legal advisor to Stephen Harper?
So, Mr. Clement, I'm also struck by the fact that it looked from the testimony that Nigel Wright and Chris Woodcock and all of these people in the Prime Minister's office were doing everything they could, throwing Duffy on the ground and making him pay back this money. And when he wouldn't pay it back, they agreed to pay it back, even though he didn't want to do it. And I don't know why Nigel Wright wasn't charged with bribery just as much as Duffy was.
Well, at the very least, and a couple things, if I could, Bob. I watched the testimony of all three, and I can tell you from my experience, and over the years I've been involved in a lot of interviews, and I've never seen such lack of integrity as they were. I guess I'd say or use the term, it was blind loyalty to the Conservative Party at the expense of due process. Because anybody that watched the body language, the way that, and a good example was when Mr. Wright decided to quote the Bible. That is a great deflection technique that when you're interviewing somebody, they'll try and change the subject or use a deflection technique. I'll tell you, it really calls into question the whole, as you started off, where's the ethics? Nobody's forthright, nobody tells the truth, and this, I don't think, is the type of political leadership we want to see.
Speaking of telling the truth, you have the lawyer saying that he was in a room when Nigel Wright told Ray Novak, who was Mr. Harper's closest aide, that he's paying the $90,000. One is under oath, one has not gone under oath. Who does the judge believe? Who's lying?
Credibility and reliability contests, are not strangers to Canadian courtrooms. These are things that judges have to grapple with every day. And the reason for that is evidence comes out of the mouth of real live human beings. You know, you ask your average Canadian on the street, they probably can't remember what they had for breakfast last week, never mind who was present in a room when a conversation was had a year ago or more. So, you know, I'm always very quick to point out that that doesn't mean necessarily that one person is lying. It very well might be that, but, you know, people do have different recollections. Some people have better memories than others, but ultimately the judge needs to look at all the factors. So, you know, what other parts of the stories were inconsistent with each other? Was this person able to relate other details about other events that show that they have a good recall and obviously a willingness to tell the truth?
Chris Woodcock and Ray Novak said they haven't even read emails from Nigel Wright on this. Who do you believe, Novak or Perrin?
I tend to believe Novak, and it's simply because I worked with him, and I always found him to be pretty much a straight shooter. So from that viewpoint, I would give him the benefit of the doubt on this one, and it's just the personality and the person I know.
Garry, I have to ask you this. The RCMP have turned over its investigative file to Crown prosecutors on Pamela Wallen. What does that mean? Are we close to the police laying charges?
They've completed their investigation. They submit it to the Crown, who reviews it. And the idea behind the Crown reviewing is they're looking at it from the weight of the evidence to ensure that there is a likelihood of conviction. So this is a normal process, but what it means to me is that the RCMP has completed its investigation. They've obviously drawn some conclusions that they feel there's sufficient grounds there to lay a charge, and now they're deferring to the Crown to see if they agree with them.
So, Mr. Friedman, what's your sense is that would the Crown recommend that charges go ahead during an election campaign, or would they want to say, you know, let's not interfere?
You know, I would say this, you know, we're dealing here with the provincial prosecutor. This is not the federal prosecution who'd be conducting the Pamela Wallen prosecution anyways. I would suspect that their advice and their deciding to proceed would have absolutely nothing to do with the election. You know, they are politically neutral actors. They've conducted themselves, whether the Duffy trial is on during the election or off during the election. I don't think they have an eye to that. If they believe there's both a reasonable prospect of conviction and it's in the public interest to proceed, they'll lay charges as soon as they're ready.
Okay, if Pamela Wallen's charged during the election, Keith, what does that mean?
Bang. that would certainly upset the apple cart a little bit, that's for sure. I mean, it would just be another ongoing saga of defensive moves on the part of the Conservatives.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much. Great discussion. Appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.